All right, welcome to the Cwic Media Come Follow Me series. We are covering Genesis 24 through 27. We're going to be focusing in on the Abrahamic Covenant, going through the three different generations, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't get to Jacob's marriage here, but we do get to his inheritance and to his blessing. Those are two separate things. We're going to go over that. A couple things to keep in mind as we go through these four chapters here. Number one, there's something strange going on here with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I don't know the answer to it. It seems to pop its head up whenever we're talking about the legacy, the posterity, the law of chastity, and going into the Abrahamic Covenant, and that is trickery. I don't know why it's there. I find very few people that bring this up other than with Jacob, but you see it with all three generations. And it's, Hugh Nibley talks about this, especially with Jacob, but he never explains why we see this. And I've never been able to find this reasoning as to why, but I think that what it allows us to do is when we identify this trickery, so to speak, we can see that it's talking about the importance of posterity, the importance of the Abrahamic Covenant and an eternal family. And I'll point that out as we go through this. And then we're going to talk about some of the customs and maybe rituals that we might be able to identify in this ancient culture that helps provide the foundation for this type of a story and for the events that unfold here. Now, going directly to chapter 24 and verse 1, we get here, and Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house, this is probably Eliezer, that ruled over all that he had, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh. So this is a way that really, it was, whether it's under your thigh or on top of your thigh, it was a way of creating a covenant, a promise. Now, Joseph Smith here in the Joseph Smith translation has put thy hand under my hand. So maybe something more like a handshake, right? But we do see this event happen more later on in Genesis, where there is a hand that seems to be put onto a thigh, and this seems to be a cultural thing. Now, in verse 3, we start getting something that is, again, it's a matter of protecting the Abrahamic Covenant. All right, this is, keep in mind, obviously, these prophets know what this is. They know how important it is. There is a great focus on it. And really, if you look for it, you see it all the way back to Adam and Eve. Right, the Abrahamic Covenant is there. And here in verse 3, we get, and I will make thee swear by the Lord, this is to his servant, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. So Abraham, being stricken in age, he doesn't want to make the journey here. He's going to send his servant to go back to the land of his kindred, to the land of his family, which is Haran and Nahor. And, this is going to be well up north in the land of southern Turkey, northern Syria, probably. An area that was known as Padan Aram. And it's where we get the term Aramaic actually from there, because they end up migrating down over to Babylon later on, the Aramites, if you will, and they end up taking over the culture in a lot of ways, and the language and other things, and so and to some degree ruling, and so in Babylon they end up speaking Aramaic. And so when, after Lehi leaves and the Jews are taken into exile, a lot of the Jews obviously and the Jews are, a portion of the Jews at least, are taken into exile under King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. They go to Babylon, they learn and worship in Aramaic. Maybe not completely worship, they might do that in Hebrew still. And then they come back to Jerusalem and Judah, and they're speaking Aramaic, and that's probably what Jesus ends up speaking, is in his time, and those around him are speaking in Aramaic. the language then of the Jews, outside of probably reading out of scripture and worship and other things like that. You can see this with like the Catholics, right up until Vatican II, the Mass and other rituals and worship services would be done in Latin, right? And so you would have the Jews going back, and if these things are written in Hebrew, they would still speak Hebrew and learn Hebrew. Now he says, don't take a wife of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. So what does this mean? Is this racist? Is this, what is this? Well, the important thing to understand here is that there are examples of the Israelites taking wives on that are not of the house of Israel, right? That does happen. But back then, everything, their culture, their belief system, obviously, everything is based off of their religion. These are theocracies. You could go to Babylon, you could go to Assyria, you could go to Ugarit, you could go to the Hittites, you can go to anywhere you go, everything is going to be centered around the religion. The same with the Jews, the same with the Israelites, right? And so it's not like we have today in a modern Western world where we have a pluralistic society and you have choices. It's not the same thing. And so it's very much saying, look, I do not want to bring in other gods. I don't want to bring in other worship for my children, right? I want them focusing on Jehovah. I want them focusing on the God, my God, right? The God of Abraham, the God of the creator of the world. And so marrying outside of that is a very big risk for them. And it may be that you lose what is going to be the focus here, the Abrahamic Covenant, and the idea of bringing everybody in. Eventually, for us, in modern times, the idea of sealing and eternal families, right? That's something that they don't want to mess with here. And so that's what I would look at primarily, is they don't want their kids being brought up by women that are worshiping other gods. So Abraham says, look, he's obviously seen something. He knows what's going to happen. He says the angel of the Lord is going to go before you. And this is what's going to happen. You're going to find a woman at the well, and she is going to offer you to drink, and then she's going to offer to water for the camels and probably the rest of the men that are with the servant Eleazar, right? And so he says, look, that she may choose not to follow you, right? That's fine. Then your commitment is done. But this is what is going to happen, and this is who you need to find. And so Eleazar agrees to this. He goes up to the northern country. As we get here in verse 10, and the servant took 10 camels of the camels of his master and departed, for all the goods of his master were in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia. This is not the Mesopotamia that we usually think of. That's not what this means. This is way up north. Remember, we're talking about Mesopotamia. We're talking about the land of the rivers, is what they're talking about. This is probably still the Euphrates, much further up north, but also another river up there. Unto the city of Nahor, which is up in that northern Syria, Turkey area. So he goes up, and in verse 11 it says, and he made his camels to kneel down without the city by a well of water at the time of the evening, even the time that women go out to draw water. Okay, so this is part of the custom that we get in almost all civilizations up until we have running water. And this still happens in Africa, for example. You still have in parts of Asia where you have the women will take a jar or a bucket of some sort, and they will make the long trek, sometimes miles, to a well and draw the water and bring it back to the village. So this was very, very common. I bring up the example, well, you see this all over the place in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, right? Where you have the women at the well. The same thing is going to happen with Isaac's son Jacob, when Jacob meets Rachel at the well. And you get the same thing with Moses later on, who meets his wife Zipporah, right? The daughter of Jethro at the well. And you have Jesus, who meets the Samaritan woman at the well, because she's there to draw water to bring back to the village. And so the well represents women, but it also then represents marriage. It very much is a part of the idea and concept of marriage and of covenant, right? And of covenant, which is what marriage is. And so you'll see several times in the Old Testament where there are wells that are dug when a covenant is made, and then they name the well, right? That's a normal thing to do. Another example of women at the well, I bring this up all the time, is the old, I don't know about the newer ones, but the original Disney version of The Jungle Book, where you have Mowgli, who is raised by the animals, and then at the very end, toward the end of the movie, right, he goes to that river. There's that girl there with the pot that she's carrying for water, and he kind of has that funny look on his face. He's like, "Oh, what is this?" Right? And so he meets the girl at the well, or at the water, at the river, at the pond, whatever it is. It's a very, very common thing. And so sure enough, the servant of Abraham goes to the well, and we get this in 15. And it came to pass, before he had done speaking, that behold, Rebekah came out, who was born to Bethuel. So he's speaking to the Lord. He's hoping that this whole thing happens, that he's told is going to happen. Son of Milcah, Bethuel is son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, with her pitcher upon her shoulder. So this is a family deal here. This is his kindred. And so if we move back here, we have Nahor, who is Abraham's brother. The wife of Nahor is Milcah, right? Milcah. That has whenever you see like an MLC or MLK, it has to do with royalty. That is a royal name of some sort. Now, she may be the daughter of someone of royalty. Remember, this is royalty. These people are of royal heritage. Abraham is basically a king. We oftentimes see these, or think about him, and it's just him out in the desert in a tent with Sarah, and then with Hagar and with Ishmael and Isaac, and they're out by themselves out here. Or you see them riding camels, and it's the 4 or 5 of them that are in the camels. That's not what this is, right? Abraham is essentially a king or a tribal chief. He is of royal descent, and he has of noble descent, and he has, as we're told when he goes out to fight, Sodom, or when he goes out to fight many of the cities of the plain to save Lot, right? He goes out as a warrior prophet at that time. He goes out and fights with over 300 of his own servants. 300 plus of his own servants, right? This is a very large group of people that he has. And that doesn't include all the converts that he has and people that have come in and become part of his tribe, right? Abraham is a major deal here. You don't go around out in the desert by yourself, right? He is a major deal. He has numerous flocks, numerous goods. He's a very, very wealthy and successful man. And Bethuel, the father of Rebekah, is similar, maybe not quite as much, but he's basically the king here of Haran and maybe of Nahor at least. And so he would be like the tribal chief. So Abraham's brother is Nahor, his wife is Milcah, MLC, and Milcah has the son Bethuel. So we have Bethuel would be Abraham's nephew. And then Bethuel has the daughter Rebekah, right? So fairly close family relationship here. And we're told in 16, and the damsel was very fair to look upon, a virgin, neither had any man known her. This is important in their writing because they're focused in on the purity, not just of her, but of the line, of the posterity. You can see this over and over again, that this is crucial to them, that there is a clear understanding of who the father is, essentially. We always know who the mother is, right? So Rebekah comes to the well, and she said, "Drink, my lord," to the servant. And she hasted and let down her pitcher upon her hand and gave him drink. And when she had done giving him drink, she said, "I will draw water for thy camels also until they have done drinking," and probably for his men that he has with him as well. Okay, so he knows now, okay, this is her. This is the one I was told about from Abraham. And she said unto him as he asked, she says, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, which she bare unto Nahor," Nahor being Abraham's brother. She said, "Moreover unto him, we have both straw and provender enough and room to lodge in." So you see again the story of hospitality being a very important part of this. This is a sin if you don't offer the hospitality. And in a sense, that's what she's doing when she's offering the drink. And I've heard this several times where it's kind of like, Rebecca's some kind of subservient woman or something, right? And she's out and she's just out getting water for the servant, for the men. And that's kind of silly to me, right? I mean, again, this is the daughter of essentially the tribal chief of the king, Bethuel. So it's not like she doesn't have, the goods of the world for herself. She's got a pretty good life. And in fact, it's Isaac who's not a part of any of this, right? Isaac knows nothing about this apparently, or if he does, he's certainly not a part of any choice in the matter. So anyway, I'm going to move beyond that. Now we learned that Rebekah has a brother whose name is Laban. We're going to learn more about Laban, not the Laban of the Book of Mormon, but we learn more about Laban with Jacob later on. And Laban ran out unto the man unto the well. So he comes out, he sees these gifts that the servant of Abraham has given to Rebekah, and they bring him back to their home. And he says, "Look, I mean, this is what we have to offer. Everything has been given to Isaac from Abraham. Abraham is a successful and very wealthy man. And again, this is kind of like royalty to royalty. That's what they're doing here. And Sarah, my master's wife, bare a son to my master when she was old, and unto him hath given him all that he hath." So kind of given the bona fides here to Bethuel, the father. And so they sit down to eat. Before Eliezer is willing to eat, he recounts the story of what he was told from Abraham, and that the angel of the Lord would go before him, that they would find the woman at the well, that this is what would happen, and then this is exactly what happened with Rebekah. So he recounts the entire story. And so then Laban, who is Rebekah's brother, and Bethuel, Rebekah's father, answered and said, "The thing proceedeth forth from the Lord." Now, as we went over last week, Lord here is all caps. So what they're specifically saying here, they are also worshiping Jehovah, right? The thing proceedeth forth from Jehovah. That's what they're saying there. So then they say in 51, "Behold, Rebekah is before thee. Take her and go, and let her be thy master's son's wife, as the Lord hath spoken." Now we're going to get a little bit more from input from Rebekah here in a second. Down in 55, Laban, it looks like it's Laban, and her mother say, "Let the damsel abide with us a few days, at the least 10. After that she shall go." And the servant says, "No, hinder me not. I need to take her now. This is what I've been charged with." And they say, "Okay, we will call her in, inquire at her mouth." And they called Rebekah in 58, and said unto her, wilt thou go with this man? Right? They're asking, are you going to go with him? And she said, I will go. So she chooses. We get the idea that always anciently in all cultures that women were just chattel. That is true in some cases, but not in all. Right? They're not just property. That's not the way it works. And we get these stories in some cases where maybe on the fringes that happens a little more. But for the most part, in some cultures, it doesn't happen that much. It's not exactly how that works. It does sometimes. I'm not saying it doesn't. But here, this is her choice. Is she going to go or is she not going to go? And so they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. There's his men. Again, we usually get the stories in the scriptures about these few characters, and in our minds and in an artist's mind, when they paint pictures of these stories, you only have those few characters. But that's not usually the way it is. There's usually a lot more people that are involved with this. But these things are written much later, and so you're focused in on just the main characters. Then in 60, we get more about the everlasting covenant, the new and everlasting covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. Here in 60, it says, and they blessed Rebekah and said unto her, thou art our sister. Be thou the mother of thousands of millions. Okay, I would equate that to Eve, right? Why are you calling her Eve? Because she is the mother of all living. That's what that represents, right? The same thing that Abraham and Sarah are promised. The posterity as the stars in the heavens or the sands of the sea and the dust of the earth, right? That's the exact same thing. So they know about the new and everlasting covenant. They believe in the new and everlasting covenant. They believe in that priesthood ordinance and in eternal families. And then in 61, again, more people. And Rebekah arose and her damsels, it's not just her nurse, get another level there, and they rode upon the camels and followed the man, and the servant took Rebekah and went his way. So you have a band of people. They're not going to travel by themselves. You have a band of people that are going to be traveling here. So they get down to the end of their journey. They're coming way down south now into the southern Palestine area or southern Canaan area, which was what it would be called at that time. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes in 64, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. For she had said unto the servant, what man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant had said, it is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. And then in 67, and Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Okay, so that's our story there. One more little tidbit on this, just in Jewish legend. You have Rebekah being born to Bethuel right when Isaac is to be sacrificed by Abraham. That's kind of a legendary thing that that's in the Midrash, I believe. Okay, then we get this other short bit of information here about Abraham. And this is kind of important. Then again, Abraham, so he's old, but hey, he's going to take another wife in his old age. Her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimron and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua. So the Midianites come from Midian here, from Abraham. The Midianites are in the area today of northern Arabia, right? Northern Saudi Arabia, over by the Red Sea, in that area over there. Now, the reason this is interesting for us as Latter-day Saints is because Joseph Smith, I believe it's section 84, it might be 107, but I think it's 84, says that Moses gets the Melchizedek priesthood from Jethro. Remember we talked about Moses when he escapes Egypt, when he kills the soldier, the slave master, right? He escapes. I think he knows exactly where he's going. He's going to someone who is following the faith, and that is Jethro. even though he's not a member of the house of Israel. He's a high priest, and he has the Melchizedek priesthood. And so he is going to give the Melchizedek priesthood to Moses. This is where, again, Moses meets Zipporah, his wife, at that well. So you have this line of the Melchizedek priesthood that doesn't just come through Isaac, right? The Melchizedek priesthood, the blessing, seems to also go down through Keturah here, through Keturah's son Midian at least, and then arrives down at Jethro, and Jethro then turns and gives the Melchizedek priesthood to Moses. And by the way, Moses marries Zipporah. Zipporah is not of the house of Israel, but she is of the faith, right? Her father is a high priest and has the Melchizedek priesthood. Now, it's also possible, there are other writings where we get that Moses also married an Ethiopian woman as well. And so in a lot of other non-canonical writings, you have Moses being married to more than one woman. So that's a possibility as well. But obviously, an Ethiopian woman is not of the house of Israel either. So Abraham is going to give all that he has, except for some gifts, to Isaac. Isaac receives the inheritance and also receives the blessing, but it doesn't look like he's the only one that receives, well, at least the priesthood. That's usually what the blessing would be associated with. But there seems that at least Midian also receives the priesthood from his father, Abraham. And then Abraham passes away. He's gathered up to his people, which would be not just the people on earth that are gathering to him at his burial, but he's being gathered to his ancestors, right? That's what we talk about. That's what Jesus talks about also, people being gathered to Abraham, like in the parable of the poor man, Lazarus, who is gathered to the bosom of Abraham. Then we return back down here to Isaac and Rebekah. So we're told in verse 20 that Isaac is 40 years old when he takes Rebekah as a wife, right? You see again here the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian. It's up in the north area of Padan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. Again, we're getting to Laban here shortly. So Rebekah is barren for a time, for about 20 years, it looks like. And then she's blessed with a pregnancy. Now, with her, she's blessed with twins. And so we get this in 22, and the children struggled together within her. And she said, "If it be so, why am I thus?" And she went to inquire of the Lord. Well, what is she saying? What is she asking? She's wanting to know, why are these two fighting so much? You know, why is this happening here within me? Here, these two babies are fighting with each other all the time. What's the problem? And so the Lord says to her in 23, "Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels." And that is what ends up happening. "And the one people shall be stronger than the other people." Now, of course, the people who write this are the ones of the descendants of who they see as the stronger person, being Jacob, right? But here's the important part. "And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger." Okay, so Rebekah knows before she even gives birth, apparently directly from the Lord, that the younger child, the second-born child, is going to be the one that rules, right? That she knows that from the very beginning. That's an important part of the story to understand. And then down in 25, "And the first came out red all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau." So we get hairy here. That's important. I'm going to show you why here in a minute, the word hairy. "And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them." So 20 years after he takes Rebekah on as a wife. Okay, so this is going to be a play on words here, both with Esau and with Jacob as we see this story develop. First of all, the word Jacob, the name Jacob, it has a few connotations to it, but it's basically Jacob or Jacob, which is going to mean, it means a heel or grabbing a heel. It also means the supplanter, they're going to supplant whatever is out there. So he would be supplanting Esau. But the other thing it means, and I was getting to this as part of the episode here, is it also, when you say a Hebrew idiom is or was, a heel grabber is a trickster. So that's part of the name. And we're going to see that happen here. Then in 27, I want to go over this. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. I've never, reading the Book of Mormon, I was never really satisfied with how Nephi says that he loves plain things. It just didn't sit right with me, and I'd always been looking for ways to understand more of what he means by that. Is it just simple? That didn't seem right to me. I don't think that that's really necessarily what he means, at least not on its own. So what's interesting here is that the word plain in Hebrew is tam. And tam doesn't mean simple. It means perfect or integrity or complete or moral, right? And so I think that you can look at this with Nephi, where he likes the plain things, cross-reference it here to Genesis 25:27. And when you have plain here in 25:27, Jacob is a plain man. He's a moral man. He's a virtuous man. He is a perfect man in the sense of being complete and upright. That makes a lot more sense to me with Nephi's words. And it gives us another descriptor that we wouldn't normally see here of the character of Jacob. Now, down in 28, we get this. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, or the meat of the game that they hunt, right? But Rebekah loved Jacob. So why is that? Well, what we're getting is further confirmation about what she received from the Lord, that Jacob is going to be the leader. So Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. So later on, we hear more about the Edomites. Herod was an Edomite. And they're down, I want to say, southeast a little bit of the land of Judah. And so very close there in the area. But the Edomites come here from Esau. Esau is Edom. And Edom means red. But we're going to get more. This whole idea here is about, again, it's about the birthright. It's about the inheritance. It's about the blessing. This part here is about the inheritance. The inheritance and the blessing are separate. There's a birthright inheritance, and there's a birthright blessing. They are separate. And we're going to get the story of both of those here. So Esau says to Jacob, "Look, I'm about to die. Give me the pottage to eat." And so Jacob says, "Hey, sure, here you go." So there's kind of a little bit of trickery there, maybe. Maybe not. He doesn't really show a lot of that with Jacob, but Esau loses his inheritance, and over a bowl of porridge, basically. But the story, again, is about the new and everlasting covenant. These things represent exaltation. the inheritance of the land, the blessing of the priesthood. That's all about exaltation in the Abrahamic Covenant. Now, we move over to 26 here, and we get back with Isaac. And here we're going to see the same exact thing happen. And this is where we're going to get into more of the trickery here that we seem to see around all of these events of couples and of inheritance and blessing, right? So we get in verse 1 here of chapter 26, and there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. Okay, so this is what Abraham did. Abraham went to Abimelech of the Philistines in Gerar. And before that, remember, he and Sarah went to Egypt. And the same thing happens. This is the third time, the third account that we get of this. 2 with Abraham and 1 of Isaac here, where they come out to a new land, where the husband here, first Abraham says, according to Joseph Smith, and we get this in the book of Abraham, the Lord tells Abraham to do this, to say that Sarah is my sister and not my wife. That's the trickery, right? There's these things of trickery here. Now, I would suggest that this is ritual, or at least custom, that's going on here. I don't think when you see something like this many times, something else is going on here that we don't understand. And there does seem to be a little bit of trickery here. Now, we're used to thinking, well, there's, why would the Lord deal with trickery or deceit even? And I don't know the answer to that. I think he's actually just being wise in this circumstance. And again, we don't really know why these things happen. And I think it's important to address it, even though we don't know, and not just, brush it under the rug, sweep it under the rug. There is something going on around this story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that has to do with trickery, that probably has to do with custom, that probably has to do with even ritual. And the authors are going over this, and we don't understand it, right? Because we're not used to thinking of the Lord or the prophets or plain men that are morally upright, dealing in deceit, right? So something is happening here that we can't quite put together. We don't have all of the puzzle pieces on this to understand it. But what we can see, again, is that there is a puzzle. And part of that puzzle and that view of what we have is this trickery. And when we see the trickery, we can know that it has something to do with the Abrahamic Covenant, right? So he comes to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. Now, this might be the same Abimelech. It might be the son of the Abimelech of Abraham. Abimelech basically means something to the effect of, my father the king, or the father the king, right? So just like Melchizedek, it can be a title that would be given to the king of the Philistines, right? Regardless, the same thing happens here with Isaac and Rebekah, where Isaac is going to say here in verse 7, she is my sister, where Isaac is going to say to Rebekah, where the men of the place there at Gerar asked him of his wife, and he said, she is my sister. For he feared to say, she is my wife, lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. You get the same exact words. There's something here that is not by chance. There's something, and 3 times we get this type of an account. Something's going on here with custom or ritual that we're not aware of. But keep in mind, in each of these 3 circumstances, Abraham and Sarah twice, and Isaac and Rebekah once here, what are we talking about? We're talking about not just saving Abraham and Isaac's life in this circumstance. We're talking about being tested, and we're talking about the purity of the mother, right? Who is the heir going to be? Is it going to come from Abimelech? Is it going to come from Pharaoh? Right? There's an issue of the trickery that goes around along with the idea of the purity of the line, of the lineage, and the idea of the law of chastity. And same thing happens here that happens with Sarah twice. She does not lay with Abimelech. In verse 10, and Abimelech said, "What is this thou hast done unto us? One of the people might lightly have lain with thy wife." So they didn't, right? Nobody did. "And thou shouldest have brought guiltiness upon us." So again, it has to do, they're bringing this up specifically to tell you of the purity here, right? So Abimelech also makes an oath, a covenant with Isaac. They dig wells. Same thing kind of happens here that happened with Abraham and Abimelech and Abraham and Pharaoh. And they're given, Isaac's given many goods and flocks and other things. So then Isaac goes to Beersheba, and the Lord appears to him there. And we get another piece of the Abrahamic covenant with him again, just another reminder. "And the Lord appeared unto him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father." Well, what does that mean? That means I'm the God that made the deal with Abraham, your dad. What was the deal? It's the oath and covenant of the priesthood. It's exaltation. It's eternal families. And so we're going to get the God of Abraham. And later on, of course, we have the title that we hear often, which is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, what does that mean? Well, that in all three cases, that is a title of God talking about the new and everlasting covenant, talking about the Abrahamic covenant, the deal, if you will, that God makes with each one of those three men and their wives. He says, "Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake." Okay, so same thing as with Abraham. We're talking about eternal families and posterity here. And then down at the bottom of chapter 26, Esau does not marry within the faith, right? We get this with 34 and 35. "And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah." Okay, so they're going to be worried about Jacob, right? Now, keep in mind here, Esau has already given up his inheritance, but he hasn't given up his blessing yet. And yet, he's gone out and he has married outside of the faith. And this is a concern and a problem, a grief of mind, as we're told, to Isaac and Rebekah. So we need to keep those things in mind when we read about what happens here in a minute with the blessing. There are already events that have taken place where maybe in the scriptures we get a lot more of a highlight of what seems to be absolute deceit. But there's something else happening there, right? Because Esau is already married outside of the faith. They're going to be concerned about that. And he's already given up his inheritance. And as we went over, Rebekah was told directly by the Lord when she was pregnant that Jacob was going to rule. So keep those things in mind as we go through chapter 27 here. So here in chapter 27, verse 1, "And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold, now I am old, I know not the day of my death. Now therefore, take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field and take me some venison." So something may actually be happening here besides just they may be looking for actually a sacrificial animal here. I think that's a possibility. We might be talking, and again, this story might be revolving around ritual and custom that we're not familiar with. I'm going to show you why that seems to be the case. and make me savory meat such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. Again, so there's some kind of, that would make sense if there would be a sacrifice and a prayer and a blessing that he's going to give to his sons. So Rebekah hears this. And of course, she loves Jacob, right, is what we're told, which means she probably favors him. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison and make me savory meat, that I may eat and bless thee before the Lord before my death. So she's going to get involved with the trickery here. And again, this has to do with the blessing. This has to do with the covenant. This has to do with eternal families and the line of the priesthood. And here's trickery again. And this time Rebekah's involved with it. And she says, Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I commanded thee. Go now to the flock and fetch me from thence 2 good kids of the goats. That is really interesting. And she says, I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as he loved. Now remember, as we've covered many times in the podcast, the most important ritual and the most important event in the Jewish calendar is the Day of Atonement. And anciently, what they would do is the high priest would take 2 goats, right? He's going to put his hands on one goat. He's going to remove all of the sins from that goat, take them upon himself, and acting as Jehovah, as Jesus Christ, basically. And then he's going to put them onto the other goat. He does this on the altar. And then the other goat, who has all the sins now, is going to be sent out, probably with a little scarlet, perhaps, that is on the goat, or some scarlet that would be left at a gate or a post as they are sent outside of, at least when it was in Jerusalem, would be sent outside of the city gates. And that's the scapegoat. That's where we get the term scapegoat from. So there are 2 goats in the Day of Atonement. That seems a little too coincidental here to me. There's something about ritual that's happening here. So he says, we'll bring it to your father, and he'll eat, and he will bless thee before his death. And Jacob says to Rebekah, Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. So how are we going to pull this off? Right? Notice that Rebekah is the one directing what is going on. You get this over and over again in the Old Testament. Right? It's Sarah who chooses her own son, Isaac, over Ishmael, right, from Hagar. She makes the choice. She initiates the whole thing. Abraham goes along with it. Here, Rebekah is initiating everything. She's making, in essence, the choice for who is going to receive the blessing. And that makes sense because you get the same thing with Bathsheba. With David, right? She chooses. She basically, in essence, is chooses Solomon, and so that makes sense because women represent the throne. Women are the throne. You'll see oftentimes. I did an episode on this, but oftentimes you'll see, for example, Mary, the mother of Jesus. And she'll be sitting down with her lap with the baby Jesus is in her. If you look at the way she's usually sitting and what that looks like, she is the throne. He's laying on the throne or sitting on the throne, on her. But she's the throne. She represents the throne. And so here you have the women making the choice as to who's going to be the heir, right, or receive the blessing in this instance. Now in 12, my father peradventure will fill me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver or a trickster, right? Or as Jacob. That's what that means. The connotation there would be the word Jacob. And I shall bring a curse upon me and not a blessing. And then in 13, we even get, similar to what you get with what we would, you may have heard me talk about the trial of Jesus Christ and his crucifixion, all being based on the Day of Atonement with the 2 goats, right? And remember that Pilate has Barabbas and Christ there, and he says out to the people, who should I let go? Right? It's like, which one of these 2 goats is the scapegoat, and which one is going to be the one that's sacrificed? And the people say, may his sins be upon us and our generations. That's ritual. That's ritual. And look what Rebekah says here. And his mother said unto him, upon me be thy curse, my son. Only obey my voice and go fetch me them. And this is going to be the skins and the skins of animals that he's going to put on himself to seem like he is the hairy man Esau. So in 15, and Rebekah took goodly raiment of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them upon Jacob her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats, right? So these are goats, upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck. That's also very interesting. Why is that brought up? That is where the goat was cut when they were sacrificed. The goat that is going to be sacrificed is slit. His neck is slit. His throat is slit, right? So Jacob says, you sound like Jacob, but it feels like Esau. And so he ends up giving the blessing to Jacob. So it's kind of around this idea of trickery, but at the same time, they already know who's supposed to be the ruler, right? We don't really know what is going on there, but we see that this trickery idea seems to be matched in everywhere with the idea of the law of chastity, the posterity, and with the inheritance and blessing that is given. So Esau comes in shortly after this, finds out the blessing's already been given. It appears that you can't redo things in their culture. So Esau is completely distraught. I mean, of course he is. He's completely distraught about this. And so he swears that he is going to kill Jacob. And Esau says to Isaac, and he said, is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. The birthright of the inheritance with the porridge, the pottage, and now with the blessing, right? So the idea of being supplanted, it goes along with the name Jacob, which is also a trickster or grabbing the heel. So Rebekah hears that Esau is going to kill Jacob. And so she says to Jacob in 43, now therefore, my son, obey my voice and arise, flee thou to Laban, my brother, to Haran, and tarry with him a few days until thy brother's fury turn away. Now, Jacob is going to go and dwell with Laban up north, but he's going to stay a lot longer than a few days, as we know. Now, in 46, ending the chapter, we're told this again, and this goes right back to the Abrahamic Covenant and the purity and the keeping the faith and the priesthood and everything else. It says, and Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth, or the Hittites, which is what Esau did, right? If Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these which are of the daughters of the land, what good shall my life do me? So you see, that kind of sums up everything with the new and everlasting covenant, with the Abrahamic covenant. She's like, look, I mean, their whole thing is the posterity and righteousness of their children and their grandchildren and the priesthood and the covenants and having that go generation to generation to generation. That's what this is about. And if you read this closely, and as Latter-day Saints, as we understand what the Abrahamic covenant is, well, we can see that in here. This is what this is all about. And the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a title talking about God who gave the oath of the oath and covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is in essence the promise of a promised land, the promise of posterity, like the stars in the heaven and the sands of the sea, which all represent the promise of exaltation.